So PPE classes are very discussion based. So that's like very different from school where you might, talk to the teacher. The teacher might speak to you for a fair bit and then you'll do your own work. Whereas in PPE, it's all very like everyone's putting their opinion in, having done the readings and the pre-recorded lectures before the class. So you'll know all this content about what we're going to talk about. And then we'll all talk about it as a big group. Everyone will voice their opinions and that sort of thing. So it's fairly laissez-faire in that regard. And the lecturers are certainly not very authoritative. Like they'll voice their opinions as well, and it's bounces off each other pretty much.
Yeah, awesome. Hugo, other Hugo, I'll throw it over to you. What about yourself? The kind of structure of classes you experience at Monash, similar to Hugo Boredom or different experience?
I'd say when it comes to tutors and teachers and that type of stuff, very similar. But maybe something that you might be less familiar with is, at least in design, it's studio based. So you spend about 4 hours in the studio. Your tutor or the teacher who takes care of it gives a lecture or maybe starts off the studio, but for 4 hours, you're kind of free to reign. You ask the teacher if you've got questions, you work on your assignments. It's really up to yourself. You can even leave midway through the studio if you don't think it's worth the time. That was my experience pre-COVID. I don't know if it's exactly the same.
Awesome. Teddy, what about yourself?
For me, it really depends on the subject that I'm doing. So for some of the psych classes, we'll do like pracs instead of tutes. And so they're a little bit more experiment based and I suppose more rigid in how they're run, which isn't totally dissimilar to like if you're doing a serious science experiment in like chem or something whilst you're in year 12. But otherwise, in other subjects, when you're just having standard tutes, it's very laid back and it's really focused on being conversational. So there's not a whole lot of your tutor like standing there and just talking to you the whole time. Most of it's about trying to engage and like share your point of views with other people and sort of get into a bit of a debate about what you're actually thinking about. And that can vary with how effective it is. But generally, the idea is that you try and communicate a bit more, and it's actually a lot more enjoyable rather than just having to sit there and listen to people rabbit on like I am now. So for my course, at least, it's mainly been consisted with either 2 or 3 major assessments per semester. And so like the uni format's always done in 2 semesters a year at Melbourne. And so you'll normally, at least for psych, you'll have a major exam at the end of the year that's worth sort of 50-60% of your grade. And then during the year, you'll have a lab report that's often worth about 40-odd%. And that's really extensive, requires a lot of work. And they're like, I'm writing 4 of them at the moment. And they take a lot of effort and it's quite a specific way of writing. And then otherwise, sometimes you'll do some oral presentations that are worth less points and some other little hurdle requirements, which are things that if you don't do, you'll fail the subject. But they're often like fairly simple tasks that are more based on like just checking your attendance and things like that.
And are those assessments, Teddy, are they individual stuff, or is any of it in a group, or how does that work?
It's again really dependent on your subjects and your majors. So like psych stuff isn't group based except for a couple of orals, but I've done some other subjects that have been like pretty much entirely group based. Like particularly doing sort of management and marketing stuff, I found that was a lot of group work, but things that in psych, it's pretty much entirely individual.
Awesome. Hugo Chang, what about yourself in terms of assessments in a design course? What do they look like?
Yeah, so I would say every studio and elective as well has one major project that you work towards throughout the entire semester. And that's broken up into like 3 or 4 minor assessments that are really teaching you the concepts and ideas to get to that final idea or final project. Aside from that, you might have theory classes, which is a bit more strict and rigid. It's just like writing essays or going to tutorials and doing small assignments there, but it's less interesting but kind of necessary.
And Hugo Boredom, what about yourself?
So PPE is broken up for each semester into 4 subjects, and you'll do 1 politics subject, 1 economic subject, a philosophy subject, and an integrated subject of all 3. So like a PPE integrated subject. So typically that'll mean that for politics and philosophy, assessments based largely on essays. So you'll probably write maybe a couple of essays, and then you'll have, a few quizzes around the place as well. But economics is more quizzes and like group assignments. And then that integrated PPE subject you'll do is, again, a lot of quizzes, and you'll also do like an analysis, like a policy analysis at the end. Just like analysing, say, one of the government's newest policies or something, or even creating your own policy. That's quite typical of the PPE integrated subjects. Yeah, so I find that the workload at uni is definitely lighter on the whole, but you will go through periods where you've got, say, 3 essays due, which I've had this last week, and you'll sort of be doing 2 to 3 hours a day of work. And it will be hard to, stay in touch with your other subjects and that sort of thing. But mind you, I still don't think that, like, the study for the VCE exam period, I don't think that, any uni work that I've done so far has matched that level of intensity.
Interesting. Hugo Chang, what about yourself?
Yeah, I think design is kind of privileged in that GPA and marks is something that's less of a priority, and it's more about thinking about your work and your folio. So I think it's like the work depends on you. You can either spend as much time as you want or very little and kind of still get away with it. Like obviously doing the bare minimum is not going to cut it, because when you graduate, you will have no work to show. So what I recommend is like put a reasonable amount of time into anything that's minor, but save that energy for passion projects, because you'll definitely find them when you get into uni.
I'm quite lucky because I only work on the weekends at the MCG, so I don't find that anything clashes in terms of uni to that job. But even if you did have a part-time job during the week, or a volunteer job or whatever you're doing, I can't see it clashing too much. I think it's very plausible to do both, because as the other boys have said, you really get what you put into uni. You don't necessarily need to work extremely hard and do X amount of hours and sacrifice your job. Really, it's very, very simple, I think, to balance both, especially if you're crunching all your classes into, say, 3 days, and then letting those last 2 days allow you to work. I think, balancing both is not a problem.
Yeah, awesome. Changi, what about yourself?
Yeah, so I remember working at Hoyts for part-time jobs and like internet cafes, and just going around various part-time jobs for university. It's definitely throwing yourself in the deep end a bit, because you got to juggle social life, university, jobs, and then later on in 3rd year, like looking for like a full-time job. And so there are definitely sleepless nights, being absent from my social life and disappearing from friends to keep up with workload. It's just a juggling act. But yeah, it's at some point it'll become normalized and you'll get a handle on things. I would highly recommend getting a job if you do have the time for it. If you have the capacity for it. Not everyone feels like they need to. Not everyone feels like they have the capacity to juggle all the things in their life.
Internships are totally depend on what you want to do post degree. So one of the things with an arts degree is it is so broad that you can be applying to very similar jobs to what people that are doing commerce or business are doing. And that's, like my degree is applicable to those same sort of roles. So consultancies are, one thing that I'm applying to, and internships are really valuable there, but equally it's not the be all and end all if you don't get an internship. Like they're helpful and it's a bit of a foot in the door, but I think, you really want to be able to make sure that you're performing well at uni, and those things really come first.
Hugo Chang, maybe I'll throw it over you. I guess you've got the most kind of experience out of anyone here in terms of different jobs. Maybe you want to kind of speak to your experience.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with what Teddy just said at the end. Like, take care of uni first before you worry about placements and jobs and internships, because you probably won't get an internship if your work isn't up to par. But when it comes to design, there are honor programs. I know at RMIT and Swinburne where they do a work placement for their final year. So for your semester's work, you're literally working at an agency or studio or wherever Swinburne or RMIT have placed you. Monash in their honor program do something similar. It's just a short stint at like a place to work at. It's similar to an internship. Yeah, it's great to have one, but it doesn't hurt to not do one either, as long as you put in the work post-grad to find that job, if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, so PPE is fairly public relations based. So you'd likely go into a job, in advocacy, working in politics, working in economics, sort of. I think, yeah, politics is the main point, and everything that sort of feeds into politics. So if you wanted to work at like the Grattan Institute or the Doherty Institute or whatever, I think that sort of thing, like just everything that feeds into politics, because really that's what the course is for. Everything that does, create the decision making for politics is what you'd be into for employment.
Teddy, what about yourself?
Well, it's really depending on how you're using it. So my sort of degree, I almost split into two parts. There's like the arts side of it, which is really broad, and you can, technically you can apply to pretty much anywhere. And most grad programs and internships accept an arts degree as like one of their desired degrees, obviously depending on a role. So like, I'm not going to go and apply to be an accountant because like I have no idea how to do that. I'll leave that to you, Strath. But for a lot of other things, in mainly like consultancies are a big employer. And so in areas like management consulting, which is something of interest to me, that you can enter in with an arts degree. And then the psychology sides of things, that you have to do postgraduate study, typically a PhD. And so that's, obviously a really long way down the track. And that's something that I'm not interested in. I'm much more interested in doing postgraduate business study, so something like an MBA. But a caveat at the Melbourne MBA is you have to have worked for 2 years prior to doing the MBA. So in an ideal world, I would get a job upon finishing undergrad, and then I'd go back and do an MBA, which would help sort of the business stream of life further down the track.
Yeah, awesome. Hugo, what about yourself? Any extra study required, or what kind of jobs are you going into post-degree?
Echoing what Teddy just said about being able to get hired anywhere, literally anywhere. I've had friends who got enrolled into large corporates like Deloitte and IBM or KPMG. They usually went through the graduate program. You can even go global. I've had a friend who straight out of uni went to the Austrian Alps to go work at a digital agency over there. I myself got hired locally at a digital agency, like quite a few of my other colleagues at the time. Startups are very much an option if that's what you're looking for, as well as I would say two big industries which you might, if you're in design, be interested in is entertainment or tech. They're always hiring, so you might get hired in unconventional places like a nightclub, or the corporates who own all the nightclubs in Melbourne, and you end up doing graphic design work for them. It's really up to you what you look for and what opportunities are there at the time.
my main bit of advice is that you need to be prepared to move in a non-linear fashion. And by that, looking at my personal experience, I went to uni and I started doing a double major in history and criminology for absolutely no reason. And it sucked, and I didn't see, how I was gonna get a job out of it. So I thought that's a waste of time. And then I decided to switch into psychology, and that was going to add on a whole bunch of time to my degree. But I figured that it's going to be much better to invest the time and get things right now, rather than find myself 10 years down the track and I've got a big problem on my hands and I need to figure out how to get a job or whatever. So in school, you move from year 10 to year 11 to year 12, your map is really, really clear. At uni, it's not as clear as that. And there's a lot of different ways to get to what you want to do. And if you need to, move laterally and do something a bit different, then be prepared to sort of take those risks and figure it out, because there's really different ways to get into what you want to do, or to find something that you're more passionate about, or like me, just find something way more relevant to my career. So that's my main advice, really.
Awesome. Hugo Chang, what about yourself? Any little bits of advice?
Yeah, I'd definitely say collaboration over competition. You're going through high school, it's very competitive. You got to kind of get out of that mindset in university. When you're in your school projects, you're the creative director, you're the art director, you're the lead designer, you're literally everything. So not only do you establish the vision of what you're creating, but you're executing on every little detail. You call the shots, including whether or not you incorporate other people's feedback. So oftentimes great design comes as a result of many minds coming together, or ideas that are built off each other. There's no heroes in design, especially in university. It's only a collective genius. So really use the resources there. Use the fact that the school is a community of design nerds who are all passionate about the same thing that you're there for. And if you want to do a passion project or do branding but lack illustration skills, ask the friend who's doodling or collaborate on that idea. Or if both you and that friend, love the same type of music, partner on designing some sort of music festival. Build a relationship with those around you at university and cultivate that community. Not only will that establish a good support system for you in university, but I still have those friendships and connections now, in my career. I still use them. They still come in contact, and yeah, it's really handy.